I am a fungal ecologist or a mycologist that's really interested in ecosystems. So mycology is the study of fungi. And yeah, I did an ecology degree nearly 30 years ago now, and I came out of it thinking fungi were part of the whole network of ecosystems. And apparently most of my colleagues seem to leave and focus on animals and plants. So I think I kind of stayed with mycology. And yes, my driving interest is conservation. I think the planet has lots of issues at the moment, and there's lots of well-meaning people doing really wonderful things. And hopefully if I give you a little bit of information tonight, that means you're a little bit broader and you can include some fungi in some of the stuff, what you do. I feel like my job is working. So I'm going to share my screen so you can see some of the beautiful photos that fungi give us the opportunities for. And yes, these are macrofungi that you can see here. And so macrofungi are simply macro meaning large fungi that put reproductive structures up that we can see. So there are lots of fungi we also struggle to see, microfungi, and they are very important in ecosystems. But yeah, I will try and use the ones that we can see as a gateway to understanding the ecology of fungi. And yes, as Simon said, please do pop questions in the chat. It's much better to have questions in context for me getting a question and like flicking back 15 slides because it was from earlier in the evening. So I'm just going to start with these two slides, and they're actually summary slides because my plan is to basically give you a little bit of an idea about fungi first up with these first 3 slides, and then I'm going to link it to trees, and then we're going to go back into some of the deeper ecology, kind of the backstory. So the fungi is a whole kingdom, similar to animals is a whole kingdom. So we know that like a kangaroo and a beetle are both animals, but they're tremendously different, the difference between a kangaroo and a beetle. Well, fungi are similar that way. So we have lichens, which are actually symbioses. They look like little plants that stick on rocks and trees and things, but actually they're what we now think of as kind of meta-organisms. And these guys are great. They act like plants. They capture carbon dioxide, their habitat, and they also help with air quality. Decomposer fungi are super important for recycling nutrients, and I'll get into that a little bit deeper later on. I'm going to tell you a bit about fungal hyphae. So we think of these macrofungi, these pictures here, those are actually just the flowers or fruit of the fungus. And so I'm going to tell you a bit more about that. So there's the hidden body of the fungi, the mycelium or the hyphae. And yeah, these are actually great and really important for healthy soils. Fungi themselves are food for animals, and in Australia we're actually a centre of diversity for truffle-like fungi. So I'm going to tell you guys about these cute little bandicoots and these amazing truffle-like fungi in a bit. Fungi, when I first started studying fungi, the first thing we learnt about was galls and diseases and rusts and smuts and how terrible they were for agriculture. Luckily, we've moved on, and yes, we really do have some problem species, but that's not my job here to tell you tonight. I'm going to try and tell you about the good news stories. I'm going to tell you a bit about mycorrhiza, and these are the relationships that fungi have on the roots of plants, and they're critical for nutrition. So I'm going to go quite deeply into that. There's a group of fungi I'm actually probably not going to tell you heaps about, but they're a bit like mycorrhiza, so the endophyte, endo meaning inside, phyte meaning plant. So plants actually have fungal relationships not just on their roots, but actually through the whole plant tissue. And yeah, endophytes are kind of interesting because they cross the whole ecological spectrum from beneficial to plants, neutral, and also sometimes negative. So now I just want to give you a little 101 about hyphae or mycelium-based fungi. Now, fungi are a whole kingdom, so there are cellular fungi, and you actually know about some of the cellular fungi if you have any interest in bread, yeast, wine, beer, Vegemite. They're all yeast, and so they're fungi that actually just live as single cells, a bit like bacteria or some of the single-celled organisms. But the fungi I'm mainly talking about tonight are actually these hyphal or thread-based, and they actually live in things. They live in logs, in soil, in leaves. And so that's quite different. We are used to sort of solid organisms. No animal tries to walk through a tree, and yet fungi threads can actually all intertwine. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about this picture I've got here. So this is actually at the leaf litter layer. What I've done is I've been in some lovely wet forest and I've lifted away the leaf litter, and here has been this beautiful orange mat. And so a fungal thread is about 1/10 of a human hair. So a single hyphae, one of these threads, you can't see on its own. You can only see it when it bundles up. And what these fungus bundles are doing, these lovely orange mats, this fungus is getting ready to reproduce. So these two little blobs here are actually baby mushrooms waiting to emerge overnight. And so this is why fungi seem to be magical, because, you know, you're out there one day and the next day, there they are in glory. And they've actually spent the time beforehand grabbing their nutrition, getting everything ready, and then waiting for that rain trigger to then pop up overnight. And as I said, that's like the fruit or the flower of the fungus. It's just the reproductive tissue, and the body of the fungus has been hidden, and in this case, in the soil. And this is a mycorrhizal fungi, so connecting to plants underneath. And so, yeah, we get this brilliant mycelium that we can actually see at the point where it's just getting ready to reproduce. And so I said confusingly before that animals don't try and walk through plants because they're solid. Well, fungi, if you're a bunch of threads, you can actually have multiple species in the same space, like we have this bowl of multicoloured spaghetti. If every colour spaghetti, each colour is an individual species, you can see how you can actually have many fungi in the same space because they are thread-based organisms. And sometimes they interact, sometimes they're neutral, they're just threads in the same space and they don't communicate. And sometimes they actually share or communicate. So, yeah, fungi are quite a different group of organisms, particularly these hyphal and thread-based ones. And so just to, a single thread is a hypha, collective threads are hyphae, or several threads are hyphae, and a collective of hyphae is actually a mycelium. And some people will have heard the concept of mycelium and the network of fungal threads. So that's a little biology 101. For now, I just want to take you through on a theoretical exercise of thinking about how many fungi does it actually take to have a healthy tree. We kind of think of trees as quite independent, and so this is a tree that I actually worked on my PhD in a mountain ash forest in Tasmania. So this is actually one of the lovely mountain ash forest trees that I would used to drive past on this fire break. And let's begin the number of different fungi that a tree might need. So these pictured here are some of the beautiful forms of these mycorrhizal fungi that you may have heard about. Some of them look like mushrooms, others are pustules, but there is tremendous diversity in shape and form of the mycorrhizal fungi. And interestingly, the fungi that partner with trees and shrubs are mostly these macroscopic reproductive structures. So mushrooms, pustules, corals that we can actually see. And I think it's really lovely how we can actually engage with some of these now and start to record them from our local areas. So this tree needs some mycorrhizal fungi on its roots. I said earlier, Australia is a centre of diversity for truffle-like fungi. And so here is simply the diversity of truffle-like fungi. And truffle-like fungi are fungi that have stopped popping up above the leaf layer because Australia has actually been a drying climate for about the last 35 million years. And this is an adaptation that macrofungi have had to be able to actually survive that drying climate. And yeah, they have some beautiful forms. So these guys are really important, and you'll hear a little bit later about how animals are also important as part of this story. But these are also some of the mycorrhizal fungi that are making trees healthy and maintaining tree health through the lifetime of the tree. So these are the endophytic fungi, so the fungi that live in the tissue of plants. We're really only beginning to touch on understanding the biology of endophytic fungi, but some of the early research, we already know that these guys help plants with drought tolerance. So any group of fungi that is going to help our plant health, our tree health with drought tolerance, with climatic warming, I think is absolutely critical. These often produce these cup fungi. Some of them are really small, only a few mil across, and others, this lovely scarlet bracket disc fungus is actually about up to 4 or 5 centimetres across. So they're really, really large and quite beautiful. And the slide behind is actually the plant tissue, and the blue squiggles is actually the fungal hyphae stains in the plant tissue. So you really can see that the fungal tissue are within the living plant. And yeah, they're an amazing group. If I had more time and money, that's, I think, would be the group that I really wanted to learn about more. These guys get a bad rap. Foresters think these guys are bad because these are what we call plant pathogens. So these are the fungi that do damage wood. And so if you're into timber, which foresters usually are, these are the bad guys. These are the ones that, mean that my commercial wood has holes in it and stains and different colours. But actually, for nature, this is a story I'm going to tell you a little bit more about. But have you ever thought about how hollows form? We know our mammals and birds need hollows. But yeah, have you ever thought about what starts a hollow? I'm going to tell you a bit more about that in a little while. But yeah, plant pathogens are part of the ecosystem. And in fact, some of the oldest living fungi that we've now aged have been a plant pathogen. People may have heard of the humongous fungus, one of the world's largest living organisms. It's actually a plant pathogen that has been living with a grove of aspen in Oregon for over 8,000 years. So some fungi can be tremendously long-lived and yet apparently live for a very long time with living off their plant hosts without killing them. These are some of the glorious shapes of recyclers. Nutrient recycling is really critical. Plants need nutrition. The mycorrhizal fungi that help those plants need to get nutrition from somewhere. They're not magical creatures that can make nutrients, but they can capture nutrients. And so these recycler fungi are critical for healthy ecosystems, and understanding how our recycling goes on, I think, is going to get more and more important as for a focus on conservation. So beautiful forms and shapes. So yeah, again, here are some of the fungi that this tree needs. Here are some more of the lichens, these amazing multiple symbioses that live on trees, on rocks, on the soil, capturing carbon, and some of them actually share nitrogen because the cyanobacteria can take atmospheric nitrogen, and nitrogen is really important for proteins. So yeah, these are actually important for ecosystem services, the lichens that we, probably barely notice on the rocks and trees about us. So this is kind of how I think of as ecosystems are a multitude of fungi connecting out, and a lot of the connections are with plants. So I might just pause there from that little concept. Were there any questions in the chat there yet, or are people just kicking back and having a bit of a listen?
No chat so far, but yes, if you guys have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or in the Q&A. Actually, at the bottom you'll find Q&A, and that's where you can put in your questions for Sapphire, and I'll be monitoring the chat. Thanks,
Great.
Sapphire.
No worries. Okay, let me move on to a bit more data, a few less photos, and talk to you about biodiversity. So we hear a lot about biodiversity, and I really love reminding people that the bio part, the biology of biodiversity, comes from the Greeks. And the Greeks simply talked about living things. Unfortunately, when bios, got translated into dictionaries, they said it was the diversity of animals and plants, which is very simplistic. So if we look here, most people, when they talk about animals, they mean things with a spine. They think birds, mammals, reptiles, fish, frogs. So in fact, when most people say animals, they mean vertebrates. So if we look at the diversity of vertebrates in Australia, it is only 2%. And I think probably most of the biodiversity data is on those mammals. We know the most about not the mammals, the vertebrates. If we then take plants and all of the diversity of plants, and Australia is a hotspot for all sorts of plants, that's only 5%. So we've got 2% for vertebrates, 5% for plants, and I think that is our most understanding is 7% of Australia's biodiversity. The lion's share of biodiversity are actually the things without a spine, the invertebrates. Fungi come in at about 9%, and that's probably an underestimate. And then there's all the prokaryotes, which are bacteria and archaea, and they're 7%. So yeah, we have lots of different groups of organisms that actually barely get a look in for biodiversity, and yet they're absolutely critical for ecosystem services. So I really hope in this decade, as we start looking for solutions for restoration, that we really look at the whole ecosystem. And yeah, I'm an advocate for the fungi, but I know my fungi interact with all of these organisms, and we need to understand all of them.
Sapphire, sorry to interrupt. We do have one question in the Q&A, and it's a question from Judy. She's asking, what is the difference between mycelium and mycorrhiza?
Good question. So mycelium simply means a collective network of fungal hyphae. So that could be recycler fungi, mycorrhiza, which are the fungi that partner with plants. It could also be some other groups of fungi. So yeah, mycelium is a collective. It doesn't tell you what the function is. If you just say, I have a mycelium, we know that there is a network of fungi, but we don't know what they're doing. Whereas mycorrhiza, specifically, myco meaning fungus and rhiza meaning root, these are beneficial symbiotes on the roots of plants that help make them healthy. So yeah, they both begin with M, but they mean slightly different things, but they're both to do with fungi. And a lot of people, particularly with the nutrient sharing of mycorrhizal fungi between different plants and different fungi, I guess makes it easy for people to think that the mycelium is the collective for mycorrhiza, but it's not true. It's it's separate. So yeah, a mycelium is just a collective of fungal threads and not understanding necessarily the ecology. So I want to have a little bit of a focus on the recycler fungi, because as I said, I really think nutrient cycles and keeping nutrient in ecosystems are making sure that we're managing that nutrient so that it is available to plants to be absorbed and keep those plants healthy is really critical. So yeah, as I've said, there's lots of different organisms that actually are part of the recycling. It's not actually a single group. It's not bacteria do all the decomposition or fungi do all the decomposition. It's actually interconnections between fungi, bacteria, slime moths, people may have heard, which people used to think were fungi, and we now actually know are an amoeba group. And it is the connections between these less charismatic animals and fungi and various different things that actually make it work. So let me just show you a little bit of how this might work. So in this picture, we've got some living trees, but we also have a standing dead tree, and we have a fallen log. And all of that woody material is actually nutrition for fungi. And inside those logs, we know that beetles, we think of beetles eat wood. Well, yes, beetles may eat wood, but they're not actually termites. They can't digest wood, so they can't actually get nutrition just out of the wood. What beetles are actually absorbing is they eat the wood, but they are getting their nutrition from the fungal hyphae that are decomposing the wood. So this is why we need this whole network, because there are fungi that are decomposing this wood, being eaten by beetles and other organisms. And the moment you have invertebrates in something, you've got food for larger animals, like our blue-tongued lizard here, or the bird that's just at the top of the screen. So decomposition cycles are often a food web, and we need to think about that more. And so these mycorrhizae, you can see here the nutrition going down into the soil, and then yes, the mycorrhizas are very adept at getting those nutrients out of the soil and then sharing them up into their plant partners. I do want to just also say that fungal reproductive structures are actually food for a whole group of organisms, and the fact these animals that are all eating these fungal reproductive structures, they eat and they poo. And any gardener will tell you that basically adding manure to your garden is a great way to get nutrients in it. And so having all of these small animals eating fungal structures and pooing is actually part of that recycling nutrient going on. Basically, lots of little animals make a whole lot of manure for our ecosystems. So I told you I'd tell you a little bit more about hollows and how hollows form. So most people are probably aware that it's older trees in our landscape that have the hollows, but it's not happy birthday tree, you're 100, here you better have a hollow, you know, you're getting there now, you're at the right age to have it. Hollows that are needed for our animals actually don't just spontaneously happen. So those pathogenic fungi, the wood rot fungi that I told you about that foresters really don't like, what they often do is they will get into a broken branch or a bit of a gap in the bark, and they will come in and they will tap into that living plant and they will start taking nutrition because they are a parasite. They take nutrition and they don't necessarily give anything back to the plant. But the moment that has happened, you have fungal hyphae in wood. And what I told you before, and if you look to the sort of left of the screen, you'll see all these little microinvertebrates that are teeny tiny. We can't imagine how small they are. But these are the guys that actually really start getting in there and eating a lot of those fungal hyphae. And beetles also do get in on the fungal hyphae. And yeah, once you have invertebrates in wood, you've got food for birds and other animals. So those larger animals then go in to get those invertebrates, tap, 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 break it open. Oh, once you've broken it open, you've actually made the hollow bigger. And so it's actually a system that starts with the so the audio has changed. Yeah, so it's a whole system that goes through, and so we get bigger and bigger hollows, and that's why older trees have hollows, is because there's actually been time for this system to kick in, because wood rot fungi are actually really quite long-lived, and a lot of these microinvertebrates, beetles can, you know, stay on the ground for 15, 20 years eating the roots of some of our trees and things. So yeah, I don't know if anyone thought about hollows before, but nature is way better. So this is a nest box that was up in the canopy for about 25 years. And this is our solution, because we've taken so many large trees out of our landscape. And yeah, these nest boxes, if a tree takes 100 years to get a hollow, our nest boxes only last about 25 years. We're going to put nest box up 4 times before, you know, we can actually regrow some of the big trees we need that will become hollow bearing. And in fact, these are not very good solutions. A lot of animals don't actually really enjoy living in nest boxes. So yeah, let's allow nature to happen. Yeah, trim your trees over car parks and buildings and the like. But in patches of bush where it's large, and it doesn't matter if a branch or something falls down to risk, we need to leave those branches in untrimmed, even if they do die off, because that is part of the hollow forming process. And yeah, we need to let nature be messy in as many places as we can, so that the ecosystems keep doing their jobs. So it's not chance that I put the little yellow robin up as a photo, just as a bit of a nod to the canaries in the coal mine, because probably, arguably, most of the global conservation has actually come, a lot of it's happened with birds. People know a huge amount birds. Lots of people are bird watchers. They collect a huge amount of data. And so birds are probably the best understood group on the planet. And this is data showing us about the health of birds across the globe. And as you can see, it is a net drop. All populations of all bird groups we know are falling. And so, I've been doing conservation for the last 30 years, and there is more and more knowledge and interest in conservation, but there's not necessarily great action on the ground. And in fact, inaction is an action. So the birds have been little canaries in the coal mine telling us that there is something wrong. And that's my entire biological career. And people may have heard in the last 5 years about what we're calling insect Armageddon. So similar to the bird stories, we are now seeing that across the board, these invertebrates, the largest part of the biodiversity pie, all of those populations are also falling. And this is data that we know. I would love to tell you about, the fungi that we're losing as well. Well, I wouldn't love to tell you about the fungi we're losing, but I'd like to hopefully stop that. But we don't have that data for fungi. And yet 2 huge groups are telling us that there is something going on in the ecosystem. And I think what has happened in the last 30 years of conservation is people have really learned a huge amount about birds. People are starting to learn a bit about various invertebrate groups. But what I really want to know is, let's go to the root of the food chain, which are the fungi and the bacteria that are the base of that decomposition, the bottom of the food network. And my concern is Australia. I know New South Wales and Queensland is still in a super wet period, but it's sort of been the exception for the last 5 years. We have had really wet periods. Southwest WA is in drought as we speak. So for Australia, we are typically dry. And one of the concerns about drying and dry environments is when that happens, you actually get slow decomposition. If you have slow decomposition, you have less nutrients available for the plants. So does this mean as we go back into dry periods on the eastern states, and as WA is now in that really dry period, is decomposition slowing? Does that actually mean there's less nutrient available for the fungi that are helping the plants? And yeah, I still haven't seen a lot of good research even starting to think about decomposition rates. It's really hard to find any data on the subject. Most of the data comes from the late 90s. It's like, why did we stop doing this research? So yeah, this is one of the things that keeps me awake overnight, late at night, is like, oh no, nutrient cycles and decomposition. Anyway, let me tell you a bit more about some of the land management that we need to think about at scale. So mulch has become a really common thing in the last 20 or 30 years. It's used in lots of places. And yes, there are a number of fungi that will live in mulch. And I'm not saying mulch is, a thing that we should never use, but it's a bit like fast food for fungi. Basically, it's highly processed. It's all about the same size. And yeah, they're a group of fungi, some of these lovely stinkhorns. There's a slime mold down here, and we do get amazing large fruitings sometimes across the mulch. There are fungi that, really love it, but we are making habitat for a small subset of fungi. So yeah, use mulch around car parks and children's playground, that's fine. But actual for biodiversity, we need to think about maybe not mulching everywhere all the time. So this is what I would much rather see as land management, which is where it's not a risk, is, if you have to prune, just leave the prunings there. The fungi that live on leaves are different to the fungi that live on twigs, which are different to the fungi that like branches, which are different to the fungi that's, like standing deadwood, are different to the fungi that like logs. And all of the invertebrates that may be eating those fungi, they're all of these amazing niches. So we need to, as much as possible, not tidy up and not homogenise the plant matter that's coming down, that's the nutrients for the next cycle, and actually leave it there where possible. And that will allow that network of organisms, that food web, that decomposition recycling web, to actually do their job. And yeah, in different places, in warmer places, That decomposition happens over, a decade or two. But that this photo on the right is actually from Tasmania. There, the decomposition of some of those big, lovely old logs literally takes 100 years to decompose. So that's trickle nutrients for the ecosystem. And so, yeah, hopefully next time you're going, I'm going to chop this tree down and then I'm going to chip it, maybe you may think of an alternative. Like if you do have to fell a tree, leave the logs there, let the leaves fall, don't tidy up. So, yeah, what can we do for the recycler fungi is we can leave as much of that organic plant nutrients and manures from animals and the like where possible. Nature's messy, let's leave it. So, yeah, don't remove material where you can, and I understand in some areas there's also fire risk, which needs to be managed. And again, risks around people and properties is really important. But in our conservation areas, hopefully there is some opportunity to let nature take its course. So now I'm going to talk a bit more about these mycorrhiza that you've heard about and ask questions for. So yeah, a little bit more about how mycorrhiza work. I've shown you some of the lovely fruit bodies, and on the right here, there's actually a teeny tiny pine seedling. And this is actually one of the first articles on mycorrhiza was based on this pine seedling that was grown in a tub, so we could actually see what was going on. So the root network, people often plant a small plant and the plant seems to sit there and doesn't do anything. And then boom, it shoots up. So this pine seedling has actually been growing slowly. And what it's been doing is it's been putting its root network down. So the spaghetti on the right of that slide are actually the roots of the plant. And you can see it's quite a large area for a very little tree. And then the white fuzz is actually those mycorrhizal fungi on the roots of that teeny pine seedling. And so that is how basically small plants spend a lot of time seeming to not do anything, is they're pumping energy to grow their roots that then gives them a large surface area to then absorb nutrients and then be able to do that growth spurt that we always find so amazing. So yes, it's a beneficial symbiosis. Fungi are not plants. They can't capture carbon dioxide, and plants are very good at this. They basically take carbon dioxide and turn it into sugar. And fungi need the sugar, and then actually fungi are much smaller. Hyphae are much smaller than roots, so they're actually much better at getting nutrients. So basically this is a symbiosis where plants drop sugar for other nutrients and water, which in Australia, the water mycorrhizae can actually pump up from the soil because the hyphae, as I said, are really small. They can actually get into the micropores between gaps in sort of the soil. So yeah, we really need mycorrhizae to have healthy plants. Oops, did I go backwards? So that's mycorrhiza, and I've said truffle-like fungi are a really important group in Australia. We have the most diversity of truffle-like fungi, and these truffle-like fungi are also mycorrhizal fungi. And this is the adaptation to dry and climate, as I said before. But the reason that these truffle-like fungi had ancestors that were big. They popped up a mushroom, or they popped up puffball, or they popped up a big coral. But they've shrunk down to these reduced balls of fungal mass that contain spores. And the spores are the seeds of the fungi. And the reason they could do this is because we have small ground-dwelling animals that could eat these truffle-like fungi. Their noses tell them where they are. They go and dig them up. They then eat the truffle-like fungi. They get nutrition, but the spores pass through the animal into the poo, which is then basically spreading the mycorrhizal fungi, which the plants need. And unfortunately, Australia has had some of the worst mammal extinctions across the planet. So in a lot of landscapes, these small bandicoots and bettongs and bilbies and potoroos have been lost. You guys up there in Sydney are quite lucky. You've still got some of your bandies. And that is so important to actually preserve that animal network, because these guys are the matchmakers between the mycorrhizal fungi, the truffle-like fungi spores, and the young plant seedlings that are growing, they actually need to be able to meet up, and they basically do that from the bandicoots pooing and moving, because animals move around and poo. I'm a biologist, can you tell? It's all about reproduction or poo.
Sorry,
So,
Sapphire, just before you move on, I can tell that you're about to talk more about the bandicoots. There was just a question earlier on relating to the tree hollows. So Judy, he said that at bush care last week, she noticed a crimson fungus growing in vertical hollows of a large turpentine, about 1.2 meters off from the ground. And so she took photos and used iNaturalist, which is, a really great way for everyone to get involved in citizen science. So iNaturalist helped her identify the fungus to be Postia pelliculosa. I'm not sure if you know that one. And she's just wondering if they are harmful to the tree.
Postias are, they're weak pathogens, and they are also recycler fungi, so they can do a bit of both jobs. So is it harmful for the tree in the sense of, yes, it's taking some nutrients from the tree and it's not a symbiotic, it's not actually giving anything back, but most woody, these weak woody pathogens aren't taking more than the tree can do. So, most weak pathogens basically can live for decades to hundreds of years on their tree partner, and they're not doing harm. But the problem with our ecosystem networks at the moment is the natural system that kind of has evolved isn't working, because now we actually have multiple problems sometimes. So if your tree's got a couple of wet pathogens, and then we get a drought period, and and land clearing happens, and it's a bit of root damage. So some of these pathogens in bad circumstances will actually end the tree's life faster than they would have otherwise. But there's not much you can do. It's not like you can cut the pathogen out and protect the tree some way magically. So it's why arborists look at tree health, and they try and assess the risk of trees. And a lot of older arborists basically think any kind of wood rot fungus on a tree is basically going, no, this tree's dead, it's going to die in a decade or so. And that's not actually true. There are some sort of much stronger pathogens, but the Postia is not a strong pathogen. So, you just kind of accept that it's part of the ecosystem. It's probably helping make hollows, and hopefully our ecosystem management will mean that, we're not having terrible droughts for decades and decades in the future. But I'm not sure we know. Is that was the only question?
Yes, and there was just a little announcement by Chloe. She wanted to share with everyone that there will be Bandicoot Habitat Bush Care happening in the Inner West this Sunday and Wednesday morning. And so if you have any questions, maybe type in the chat to let her know. But she is inviting everyone to join Bush Care to regenerate some important habitat for our bandicoots. As Sapphire said, we're very lucky to still have them here around Sydney.
Yeah, no, you guys are so lucky. It gives me great hope that, some bandicoot populations are actually growing at the moment, because, the fungi need them, the trees, the mycorrhizal trees need them. And so, collectively together, you've got two groups of organisms that are actually dependent on these small ground-dwelling animals. And it's particularly important because there was actually work from Susan Nuski, who was working in the wet tropics, and she showed recently that they've got northern bettongs up there, and the population has had a real dive, which is really worrying. She actually looked at the mycorrhiza, these truffle-like mycorrhiza, compared to the mycorrhiza that still put the larger fruit structures up, the puffballs and the mushrooms and the corals. And she actually showed that the truffle-like fungi were better adapted to give better nutrients and water than some of the other larger mycorrhizae. So this drying for 35 million years, which has been selection pressure for the fungi to go from being large and popping up to smaller, has been going on a really long time, so that actually the truffle-like fungi are even more important because they're some of the best adapted mycorrhiza. And I should tell you that mycorrhiza is not like monogamy. Just because it's an M doesn't mean one fungus and one plant are actually how it's going to work. It is multiple fungi actually help the health of a plant. So a big, large remnant tree that's several years old would have over 100 different fungal partners on its roots. So it's really critical that we actually maintain that diversity. So yeah, let me just finish telling you about how bandicoots are not only important for fungi and spreading the spores, but the act of digging those holes and kicking that soil up and putting soil on the leaf litter is actually really important for that decomposition I was talking about. They actually activate the soil decomposition by basically burying some of those leaves. So basically these micro diggings are actually accelerating nutrient recycling in the system. And when you're burying leaves, you're actually decreasing the flammability. So in Western Australia, where their bandicoots are called quenda, they've actually shown that in remnants where there's active bandicoots, they actually have less leaf litter, so they don't actually need to do cool burning than areas that they've got where they don't have the bandicoots and they're actually burning basically these leaf litter for fire. And that means you're actually just losing nutrients into the atmosphere rather than getting nutrients back into the soil. So, basically bandicoot activity might actually be decreasing the fire risk of your local ecosystems, which I think is really, really hopeful for ecosystems. So yeah, this is kind of what I was saying before. This little bandy here, there's lots of different truffle-like fungi, different colours of different species. And so a large healthy tree actually needs a great diversity of truffle-like fungi and also some of the larger fungi that pop up reproductive structures that we can see. So yeah, we need all of the parts of our ecosystem. And yeah, healthy mycorrhizal networks are actually really important for global warming. Basically, what we now know, when I was first studying, they used to say, oh no, we need to cut down the old growth and we need to plant young forests because they suck up more carbon. And we now know that's not actually true. Remnant vegetation of any kind actually has a stable mycelium network. So fungi, recycle fungi, mycorrhizal fungi, lots of different fungi. That stable network in the soil is holding 70% more carbon than the plants above them. And so really healthy remnant patches of bushland are net carbon sinks, and which is why we absolutely need to maintain as many remnants as we can. Sorry if the camera's bouncing, the cat's rubbing herself against it, the thing I've got holding my camera up. And so, yeah, collectively, fungi and plants living together in healthy plant communities is storing carbon, and we need that. We absolutely need to keep it as much in the ground as possible. So there's a bit of hope there. I'm just going to finish up with a little bit about restoration, because a lot of you guys are local restorers, also maintaining vegetation for your local bandies, which is great. And so a lot of people say, I'm growing native plants, what can I do to get the fungi back? And there are commercial products that are available, and a lot of people go, which commercial inoculant should I be using? And my answer is, if you're working on Indigenous restoration, you shouldn't be using any of these products at the moment, because these products are imported and they come from overseas and they contain overseas fungi. And so people, some of the advertising calls it soil conditioner. But basically, if you look at the ingredients on them, these are all non-Australian fungi that probably, at best, my hope is these won't work with native plants. And so, but at worst, they might actually give homes for some of these exotic fungi. And then potentially we're releasing another weedy species into the landscape, which I really don't think is great. I'll tell you that basically New Zealand, I think it's 4 or 5 years ago now, New Zealand actually banned these commercial inoculants from being imported because they were doing some science, and they basically showed that these commercial inoculants from overseas were actually supporting the weedy pines. And New Zealand spends a tremendous amount of money because their Alps are being invaded by weedy pines. So those lovely alpine environments, they're trying to remove the pines. And yeah, they were like, we're not going to be bringing products, allow products to come in that are going to encourage exotic weeds and mess with our local diversity. And so since then, since New Zealand brought in the ban, these same companies are now trying to bring in soil conditioners where they've taken off the ingredient list where you could read they were non-New Zealand fungi, and they're just calling them soil conditioners. And it's like, no, guys. So yeah, the New Zealanders have, basically used some DNA and go, no, you're actually just trying to sell the same product with a less good label. So yeah, that's our concern is if we use these exotic commercial inoculants, we'll actually be supporting the exotic weedy plants that we're often trying to fight. So at the moment, we don't have good commercial solutions for native restoration. So what we've done at Fungi for Land is there are some things that we think are coming online. So one of the things that we think are quite encouraging is the idea of where we do have ground-dwelling marsupials, and you can see in this graph here, different animals actually have different. Some of these animals, the bandicoots and the potoroos and the bettongs, they're like fungi specialists. They eat a lot of fungi, some all year round, and some particularly in fungi season. So a large part of their diet. So they're like the really good ones that get the great diversity of truffles out there and other fungi to spread. But even swamp wallabies and paddymellons will spread a reasonable diversity of fungi. Bush rats will. Interestingly, possums will even come down and snack on the odd fungus and spread a few spores. Rabbits aren't bad. And yes, some of the larger macropods also will browse some fungi and bee distribution. So yes, one of the opportunities we think are particularly where people are doing animal trapping to monitor their populations, the scats they get from that monitoring potentially could be used in restoration. But the one thing that needs to happen before you all start, getting bags of various animals' poo is we need to do a little bit of genetic testing because there are some problem fungi in some regions, and we just need to make sure that these animals aren't snacking on some of these bad wood parasites that are actually problematic and are a concern, unlike the postia. So yeah, happy to work with people if they are interested in this kind of restoration. I think it's one of the ways we're going to end up going. And we also, on the Fungi for Land website, have puffball, using some of these Piezolythus puffballs to actually start help with nurseries. And this recipe is now being used in the Pilbara for some mine restoration because these Piezolythus are some of the generalist mycorrhizal fungi. And basically, we're wanting to work with fungi that are recognisable because what we really don't want to do is move problem fungi. So yeah, we want restoration to work towards incorporating fungi so that it improves restoration, but without actually creating some of the problems. We've all heard about the whole cane toad, brought it over to, work on cane beetle, and instead all we did was release a problem organism. So yeah, we're really keen on working a little bit more methodically and checking what we're doing. So yeah, what can we do to help our mycorrhizal fungi is we need to try and a diversity of plant hosts. So yeah, we don't want these single plantings of all a single tree species. And I think in the last 15 years, land care groups and other bush care groups have gotten much better. In the early days, they just used to put the dominant tree species back and they didn't put back any understory plants. But we actually need all of the fungi will actually be partnering with grasses, with bushes, with shrubs, with trees, with vines. So if you have a diversity of all those different plants for fungi to partner with, you've actually got a greater chance of more fungi. And yeah, absolutely, we need to be protecting our little animals because they are the matchmakers. And we need to reduce pollution where possible. Mycorrhizal fungi, threads in the soil, don't have skin. We have skin. We can stop pollution because we have skin. if you're a bunch of threads in something, particularly soil which is porous, you're directly living in that pollution. And so unfortunately, cities and industrialized areas actually have less mycorrhizal fungi simply because of the pollution in the landscape. We can also reduce soil damage. So yeah, compaction and turning over the soil. The micro digging of a bandicoot is very different to some of the ploughing and other things we do with soil. So yeah, we try and avoid that as much as possible. And yeah, mulch, yes, it can be useful in the right context. It's useful, but in hopefully remnants and bushlands, let's not mulch. It just basically fast food for a group of fungi. So yeah, I've been working on a fungi land management book, and hoping that we'll be getting that out next year. So if you're interested, look at us up at Fungi for Land. Yeah, are there any more questions?
Yes, so there is a question about testing. So the question is, how and where is testing of these products done? Is there a list of reference of local fungi available?
So the short answer is no, there aren't any local fungi available. There was a global study done 2 or 3 years ago where they tested a lot of these products around the world. And yes, a lot of them actually didn't even contain what they said they contained. So yeah, the short answer on products is no, don't use them. There is a company that is starting up, I think it's called Rhizocore, and they are quite a different product, and they're just developing now. They do have a pellet, and they are trying to use local indigenous fungi. So at the moment, they're just starting up, so I can't tell you whether they're good or bad because I haven't seen any evidence yet. So that's why on our website, we've basically got a working with fungi problem page. So yeah, get to know your problem fungi so you don't spread them. Let's start thinking about using scats for restoration. And yeah, we will be bringing more spore recipes online, but we have our first spore recipe, which is the puffballs. And yeah, we had a online workshop about using spores October last year, and we'll probably do that again this year. So we're basically wanting to work with all of the conservation groups who are interested in this kind of thing, and let's spend the next decade building tools that we know are useful and local and indigenous fungi. And yeah, let's create solutions and not problems, because we've been warned about some of the problems already.
Great, lots of questions coming in. This is really awesome. So question from Inga, does glyphosate affect the mycorrhizal network?
Yes, it's a really good question. It's quite a hard one to answer because unfortunately there is no requirement for chemical companies to actually test what the damage to fungi might be. But the little bit of research that we have managed to find, there was a study that basically showed that arbuscular mycorrhizae, which is one of the mycorrhizal groups, were suppressed by glyphosate. And in the same study, they also showed that earthworm activity was decreased. So the likely probability is that glyphosate will be suppressing fungal growth in a similar way, because basically plants and fungi have the same ischemic pathway. So the way glyphosate works is it actually interferes with one of the cellular cycles, which is anything that is the same cycles in the two groups of organisms, plants and fungi. If it suppresses it in plants, we're assuming it's suppressing in fungi. But yeah, we don't have great evidence because the chemical companies don't have to test to see what the problems of fungi are, which is usually fungi don't get included.
Okay, another question from Judy. What impact do our friends, quotation marks, the brush turkeys have as they disturb the soil so much? We have a love-hate relationship with those birds, don't we?
Yes, and so there is a little bit of data that some of the bird groups, like the brush turkeys, the malleefowl and the lyrebirds, are spreading some fungal spores. Certainly, brush turkeys, when their nests are successful, they have a great pile of decomposition, very active decomp. which we do need. But yes, unfortunately, their population numbers and the decrease of vegetation cover does mean we have this love-hate relationship, because they do move an awful lot of organic material, and sometimes it's, like they denude quite large areas. And so this is a bit like our sort of love-hate relationships with some of the larger possums. We've made lots of nesting places for possums. The population of possums has gotten really large, and in fact, possums are doing damage to some trees, and you can see some trees actually need protection from possums. So humans have kind of messed up the balance. So in larger areas, in natural systems, brush turkeys are great. But I understand that in urban environments, you can feel like you're battling them. So hopefully we have to try and increase vegetation cover, probably decrease fences so that they actually can get organic matter from a larger pool, so that they're doing less damage to smaller areas. It's going to be a balance. But they are moving some fungi.
Excellent. And a question from Samantha: is there any kinds of mulch which are more or less fungi friendly?
I'm not sure. Certainly there do seem to be differences. Different kinds of mulch do seem to have different fungi. So I guess if you had a diversity of mulch, that would be better. But ideally, where possible, leave the standing dead wood, leave the log, leave the branch. That's actually much better for the diversity of the ecosystem than mulching.
Okay, thank you. And just a question here about recording information about fungi. So how can people record information about fungi they see? So I think earlier on we talked about iNaturalist.
Yep, iNaturalist is great. And so I have a recommendation. If you are recording fungi, join the project that's called Fungi Map Australia. And this is because they basically have the best group of fungi identifiers from the region in Fungi Map Australia. So if it's added to their project, they asked a couple of extra questions: what ecosystem you're in, and what the fungus is growing on, and possibly how many, reproductive structures you can see. So adding it to that project means you'll get some of the local fungi people IDing. Not everything is recognisable from photos, but do take a couple of photos. So you want a close-up, the top and the bottom, and definitely we also want habitat shots, because habitat actually tells you quite a bit about fungi ID. So iNaturalist is great. Add it to the Fungi Map Australia project. The more data we get in there, the better science is. So life is so much easier now that we have iNaturalist. It's a great tool.
Great, thank you so much. And I think a really handy tip is to always bring along a tiny little mirror, because they're great for taking photos of the gills of the fungi, which I know is very important for identifying the species, isn't it?
Absolutely, I always have a mirror handy, and it means, I can look under the fungus, because, you used to be able to take the gill shot with selfie mode, but the cameras have got too clever now, and they keep capturing your face instead of mushroom gills. Very annoying.
I definitely developed an interest in taking photos of fungi during the COVID lockdown period. I had so much fun taking photos of fungi, and I definitely recommend people doing it. It's such a great way to enjoy the bush and also just explore what's growing around us, especially around this time of year.
Yeah, it's fungi season. Get out there, take photos. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.